everyone, and a very good day to you all. I hope you are doing well and ready for another journey into the literature. Today we are exploring Wole Soyinka's famous poem, Telephone Conversation. This poem acts like a sharp mirror reflecting the hidden realities of racism and prejudice through a seemingly ordinary exchange. With wit, irony, and biting humor, Soyinka invites us to look beyond the surface of words and see the deeper social tensions that shape human interaction. Let's move to the introduction of the poem. Wole Soyinka is a Nobel Prize-winning Nigerian playwright, poet, and activist, celebrated for his influential body of works that blends Yoruba culture with Western traditions, often exploring themes of freedom, justice, and the abuse of power through a poetical and satirical lens. As the first African to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1986, he is known for his courageous political activism. His major works include plays like A Dance of the Forest and Death and the King's Horseman, along with poetry and essays. Literary and historical context of the poem. Literary context. Wole Soyinka, a key figure in post-colonial literature, wrote during a time when African nations like Nigeria were gaining independence from European rule. Alongside thinkers like Frantz Fanon, he used literature to resist colonial oppression and foster cultural pride. The poem reflects this mission by exposing everyday racism faced by Black people in the West, showing both the dehumanizing effects of prejudice and the resilience of those who endured it. Soyinka's contribution to post-colonial literature earned him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1986. Historical context of the poem. Telephone Conversation was written during 1950s to 1960s, a period when African nations were gaining independence from European colonial powers, but racism and discrimination persisted in Europe. The poem reflects the everyday prejudice faced by Black people in Britain, showing how the legacies of colonialism continued to shape attitudes even after political rule had ended. It captures the wider struggle of formerly colonized people navigating life in white majority societies marked by inequality and exclusion. The setting of the poem. The poem Telephone Conversation is set in a red telephone booth during a call between a Black speaker and a white landlady about renting a room. Though England is implied, the country isn't named, emphasizing that such racist encounters are not confined to one place, but reflects broader struggles faced by Black people in white majority societies. The form. Soyinka's Telephone Conversation is a lyrical poetry written in free verse. It is a dialogue involving a Black man and a white woman. Let's move to the analysis of the poem. Wole Soyinka's poem Telephone Conversation introduces central post-colonial issues such as othering, stereotyping, and racial prejudice. The poem highlights the clash of cultural identities where one ideology demeans the other and asserts superiority. Through contextual and textual perspectives, the poem reveals the unstable bond between the colonizer and the colonized. Let us now begin the detailed analysis to explore how Soyinka brings these issues to light. Number one perspective is othering and stereotyping the Black. The landlady swore she lived off premises. In this line, the fear and consciousness of the renter as a demonic other emerge in the poem's initial lines when he claims that the landlady swore she lived off premises. The renter is afraid to face the lady because he is aware of the fact that how she might react. This directly reflects prejudice towards the marginalized African community. Despite having financial independence that could allow him to rent a place on his own, he remains hesitant, and his inner spirit reveals his fear. This may be considered that he is aware of society's reservations. The lines, "Madam, I warned, I hate a wasted journey. I am African." These lines strongly emphasize the renter's consciousness of being marginalized. He reveals his identity before the deal because he does not want his journey to be wasted. He knows he might be cast out, like the Jews once were. His statement, "I am African," is followed by a silence in the fawn. Silence transmission of pressurized good breeding conveys not just absence of sound but deep symbolic meaning. Why does the landlady fall silent upon hearing his identity? Are blacks not human? Do they not deserve equal rights to rent and live? This moment marks the beginning of colonial othering. The black community is depicted as frail, excluded beings who are denied access to the center. The landlady's silence reinforces this othering, for silence often reveals what cannot be said aloud. Othering in this context represents the ideology that portrays white as civilized, pure and superior while denying blacks equal dignity. Blacks and whites may share the same privilege in theory, but in practice, those privileges are distributed unequally. The landlady's attitude reflects this contradiction. Her discriminatory outlook sets herself above others. The renter, meanwhile, appears to be self-confessing when he admits, "Nothing remained but self-confession," a line that portrays blacks as inferior and marginalized, with no right to speak and ultimately forced to withdraw. The poem reflects the apartheid legacy when blacks were granted legal autonomy yet continued to face othering and stereotyping in everyday life. Neither colonizer nor colonized could escape the racial prejudice encountered by colonialism. At the same time, the description of a white lady, her lips coated in lipstick, a cigar pipe or cigarette between them, symbolizes the West always seeing itself as elevated. The renter's confession highlighting the vulnerability. He's African, he's black, as if theirs were crimes. The landlady, unable to move beyond her prejudice, bluntly asks, "How dark?" As in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, blacks are reduced to insect-like figures, stripped of humanity. The lady's question is steeped in racism. It dismisses the renter's identity and instead reduces him to his skin color. In stereotypes, blackness is often equated with evil, negativity, and hellishness. The renter is shocked. "I had not misheard," traumatized by being judged solely on color. Even his shade of skin becomes the deciding factor in whether he may rent the apartment. The act of othering demonstrates how blacks were sidelined by being deprived of basic rights. The landlady ridicules him with sarcastic tone and ironic questions, pushing him to ask whether she meant he was dark like plain chocolate or lighter like white milk chocolate. Racial judgment, though long-standing, gained further dominance with Eurocentric notions of racism, despite the existence of laws against it. Blacks remain victims of stereotypes and othering, not because of inherent fault, but because of attitudes imposed on them. A psychological conflict emerges between renter and landlady. The renter is unwilling to use the word black for his identity. Instead, he asks, "You mean like plain or milk chocolate?" This reveals the psychological struggle of black Africans. They have become uncertain about their own color. The renter resists. He howls. He screams in rejection of stereotypes tied to black skin. His mind oscillates between rejecting negative representations and confronting his black identity. Soyinka concludes by making it clear that he does not endorse stereotyping, rather, he critiques the master's attitude of rancid breath of public hide and seek. Let's move to the second interpretation of this poem. Racial stereotyping in the poem Telephone by the Landlady. Line, West African sepia, down in my passport. Soyinka speaks about the representation of East and West, representation of master and slave. He draws a comparison between the portrayal of both races. The white lady is assumed to be coated in lipstick with a cigar, whereas The renter struggles to prove his identity not as black, but milk chocolate or white. African sepia, Soyinka makes his argument strong. Down in my passport, says the renter, the passport picture of every individual is supposed to be alike. Landlady and the renter have the same color on their passport, representing the equal status on a legal basis. The passport is an official legal document that suggests equality for every citizen, whereby equality does not prevail in social institutions and the day-to-day interactions of different races. Othering is related to the marginalization of blacks at the state level, but the inculcated psyche of stereotyping prevails on cultural and social levels. The Africans lost the capacity to develop and explore their independent, trauma-free identity due to colonizers' attitude. With the process of decolonization, they tried to break free from the traps of imperialism through culture, protest, poetry, and so on. Soyinka protested against the psychological trauma that occurred as a result of racial discrimination. The renter suffers from the psychological threat. He suffers from reclaiming his identity. The poem is a discourse between the master and the slave. Landlady belongs to good breeding, but her words are rancid. The present status of colonizers mirrors the history of colonization. It would be unacceptable to ignore the cruelty of the West in shaping the present state of the colonizer. Therefore, the relation between the colonizer and the colonized cannot be interpreted from a unilateral perspective. The conversation between the renter and the lady is ingrained in the colonial behavior of the West. The ideology of the Western master has influenced the landlady. The post-colonial trauma influences the renter in Black Africa. Renter is reluctant. He is pleading with the lady to recognize his identity as he asserts, "Facially, I am Burnett, but, madam, you should see the rest of my body, the palm of my hand and my feet." These lines openly criticize Western behavior as the renter implores her to watch his shores and palms because even the blackest skin has white soles and palms. He was aware that his skin color would not be recognized, as sometimes he explained his skin tone as milk chocolate and sometimes as Burnett. The lady could not stop her investigation of his skin color. "That's dark, isn't it?" Therefore, he ended up urging the lady to see his soles and palms. The West is like a scientist in a lab who dissects the body. Similarly, the lady dissected the dignity of the black collar. The paradox is that the lady rules him out without seeing him, based on the preconceived Oriental image. The conversation between the landlady and the man is a conversation between a prejudiced, stuffed mind and a racial discrimination victim. The renter is slapped by the thunderclap from a lady. "One moment, madam." Sensing her receiver rearing on the thunderclap about my ass. "Madam," the lady shuts the phone without welcoming his explanations. He considers him negligible and his identity is nominal. The sensory discourse exposes the worst treatment of the West towards the East. The poem depicts the bigoted content between the Orient and the Occident. There is a strong association between African history and post-colonial theory, as both look at how white Western thoughts dominated non-white culture. The later mentioned dilemma is that the later mentioned dilemma is evident in Soyinka's telephone conversation. That's it for today. I will see you in the next lecture with the remaining content of the poem. Thank you so much.